Xinjiang, where around 20% of the world's cotton is produced, is again in harvest season.
Hundreds of thousands of people from ethnic minorities, including the Uyghur community, are being forced by the Chinese authorities to pick cotton.
It's estimated that nearly 1 million, mostly Muslim Uyghurs, are detained in camps in the northwest region of Xinjiang.
1 million ethnic Uyghur, Kazakh, and other Muslim minorities have been interned as a counter-terrorism measure. Inmates who've been released have complained of torture, beatings, and indoctrination in Chinese Communist Party thought.
Allegations that China strongly rejects.
Well, the thing that upsets me is, there's so much information, but there's nothing you can trust.
It's just been discovered that Shein, the most profitable fast fashion company in the world, uses cotton made with slave labor for their clothes. Slave labor in China. See, China produces 20% of the world's cotton. The global cotton market is estimated to be worth over $46 billion, or the equivalent of 18 Beyoncés, if you want to think of it that way. So you can imagine just how important cotton is to the Chinese government. It's a source of their wealth, their power. The problem is, farming is expensive. You have to pay thousands of workers a lot of money for this hard labor. A lot of that money cuts into your profits. But lucky for you, most of China's cotton is grown in a little region called Xinjiang. And what does Xinjiang have? Concentration camps, of course. Brand spanking new concentration camps filled with the ethnic Muslim minority called Uyghurs. They're the ethnic minority that originally lived in this region China now calls Xinjiang.
Uyghurs are being used as forced labor in the production of cotton.
Since 2017, up to 1 million Uyghurs have been placed in what some call concentration camps and the Chinese government calls vocational education centers.
Authorities in China's northwest are forcing hundreds of thousands of ethnic minorities to work in the region's cotton fields.
Over the years, Uyghurs have been rounded up and thrown into these re-education camps, as the CCP likes to call them.
We see 15-year-old children being detained, or elderly women, like 73-year-old women, being detained there.
Once they're locked up, these Uyghurs are then subjected to a lot of very bad things, like literal brainwashing.
When I got there, more than 900,000 people had already been detained for numerous petty reasons, like saying something wrong. We detained them on orders from the superiors, not on any evidence.
When I asked them why, and they said, my family members think they might have an intention to attend terrorist activities.
Every day I had to make the prisoners work. I needed to make them say hundreds of times, thousands of times, I am Chinese, I am proud of China.
They tortured us. They had cameras everywhere. You were not allowed to pause, scratch your head, or cry. If they saw that, they would force you onto a metal chair. They would make you sit there for 12 hours, 24 hours. You were tied to the chair, and if you tried to move, it would get tighter. Then they make you repeat Chinese words that you didn't know. If you forgot them, they used an electroshock device on your head.
They don't see ordinary people as human beings. They do things that you don't do to human beings. You use various methods to put pressure. Two people use sticks to weigh down their legs, tie him up and trample his arm, shackle their hands, pour cold water, put a water pipe into his mouth and tie him up. And other unique favourite methods? There are numerous forms. If accidents occur, it's normal that some people die.
Kiyim-kechekler hemmimiz değişip, bişimiz manda qıp 3 qetim turup otağızıp 3 qetim. Şu bir kamerın içinde 30-35 adam yatımız. 15 adam maçta her biri oxşaş bir qatarda yatımız manda bıqınımızga. 15 adam, 10 adam ya 12 adam biz bende turmuz. Her bir 2 saatda almışıp turmuz kitsi. Tolusu men ayaqda жүрегім sıqılğandı men yatay soğuk bolsama dep aş beton üstüde men yattım. Tömeşkini eniq berdim, bişim qalpaq ki degen boldim. Bişim qalpaq kedirip қолымға көзі салды. Putumға kişen saldı. Kişende mağamasını pıtılışıp jıqılıp ketsem aş sörep kötürüp meni, aş sörep aş sorak çıqla qapadı.
And one of the bad things they're subjected to is forced labor. Forced labor in the form of things like working on cotton plantations.
we not only have evidence of Uyghur forced labor in manufacturing, in garment making, we have evidence of a massive state-sponsored forced labor scheme involving hundreds of thousands, over 500,000 of ethnic minorities, and it's directly about the picking of cotton in terms of global supply chains. Now that's a game changer.
It's really troubling is, they call these Uyghur workers batches. They say they have 500 or 300 workers available to be hired in 15 days. They can be delivered within a week or 2 weeks, and then they can withstand hardship, and they promise if you hire these workers, there will be no staff loss.
Oh yes, a good chunk of the cotton China produces comes from good old slave labor.
Essentially, really everything that we purchase at this point is unfortunately touched by this.
And these are serious human rights crimes under international law.
China's cotton coming from literal slave plantations was a little concerning. So that's why in 2021, the United States cracked down and banned the import of cotton from the entire Xinjiang region. One senator called the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, quote, the most important and impactful action taken thus far by the United States to hold the Chinese Communist Party accountable for their use of slave labor, end quote. And the rest of the world isn't far behind. But one company didn't care about such bans. A company that looked at just how dirt cheap this slave cotton was, and they just couldn't help themselves. One company called Shein. Yup, that Shein. Everyone's always wondered how Shein is able to offer their impossibly low prices on clothes. Well, I guess slave labor definitely helps. And Shein's connection to slave labor is way deeper than we could have ever imagined. Stay dangerous, subscribe for more, and this is the slave cotton of Shein. Not too long ago, Shein came out of nowhere and suddenly dominated the world of fashion e-commerce overnight. They offered the West these insane deals on clothes that you just could never see from a non-Chinese based company. And one of the main ways they blew up was through their viral Shein hauls, the one that uses its own customers to be its biggest source of free marketing. Within a decade, Shein became the #1 fashion brand in America, and on their way to that pole position in 150 other companies around the globe too. People love Shein for their impossibly low prices. You can buy 5 pieces of clothing and accessories for the same price as one single thing at another store. Most items cost less than $25. A good amount of their small jewelry costs less than $1. That cheap price tag attracts one really important type of customer: young girls. Young girls that love splurging on buying a lot of clothing in one go, but can't afford high prices. The problem is, you can't sell anything for that cheap unless you're making it for next to nothing, or nothing at all, preferably. That's where the magic of slave labor comes in. For a long time, most people assumed that Shein probably was producing their clothes in a sketchy and unethical way. But it wasn't until just last month, November of 2022, that it was finally proven with cold hard evidence that Shein's clothes have links to slave labor. Only a few weeks before this video was being released, Bloomberg dropped the bombshell. Their accusation was simple: Shein clothes were coming from Xinjiang, and here's how they exposed it. First, they ordered 2 batches of clothes from Shein that were randomly chosen out of 60,000 items that popped up when searching for cotton on the website. The first package contained pants and a blouse, and the second had shorts and a dress. To make sure their findings weren't a one-off fluke, one package was ordered in March, and the other was ordered months later in July. Then, the Shein clothes were sent off to a lab in Germany for analysis. The lab tested the items using something called a stable isotope analysis. It measures the amount of carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen in fabric to determine where it came from. These types of tests show characteristics of the region where the cotton was grown, and their results are trusted around the globe. Isotope testing has been used to verify the origins of food, wood, and even used for forensic evidence in court cases. Then, they compared the Shein clothing results to 2 samples of fabric that definitely came from the Xinjiang region. By doing so, they were able to see how similar or different the isotope results were for all samples. And this finally unveiled the truth. The first batch of Shein garments, which included pants and a blouse, matched both Xinjiang region samples. As the German lab CEO put it, quote, "We have to conclude it is a typical sample from Xinjiang, China," end quote. The second batch of clothes with the shorts and dress had more variations, but the results still indicated that it very likely came from Xinjiang origin. And just like that, the first concrete piece of public evidence against Shein was discovered. But how were they doing it? The United States ban on Xinjiang cotton was a huge deal. So how is the biggest clothing company selling in America right now getting so much of this stuff past the border, right under the noses of American authorities? When the United States announced its ban on cotton from labor camps in China, most major fashion brands started scrambling. Every company, from Amazon to Target, was trying to figure out how they were going to keep making billions when they couldn't get the cheap cotton they all relied on into the US anymore. It was a key part of their supply chain, but nobody wanted to get outed as a brand who stuck to Chinese slave labor to maintain their profits, which was happening left and right since America enacted the cotton ban. So everyone was trying desperately to get Xinjiang cotton out of their clothes. Amid all the chaos, there was one company that wasn't as panicked as their competitors, Shein. As a Chinese company whose selling point was ridiculously cheap clothes, you would think they would be a little worried about these new sanctions on the backbone of their product. But they had something that none of the other companies did, a loophole. Unlike most fashion brands, Shein operates on an on-demand model where it acquires products in small batches. Then production increases based on demand, and it's all completely online. Shein also ships directly to customers from China. So when they're shipping clothing into the US, they're not giant shipments of inventory to stores or distributors across the country. No, they're sending each customer their $100 shopping spree directly to their home. Nothing major. This is vital, because the US Customs and Border Protection only evaluates shipments coming into the US that are worth over $800. That's how it flies right under the radar. Nobody is even checking their product. So why would Shein stop? They can get as much slave-made cotton into the US as possible because of this neat little loophole they've found. This isn't the first time that the elusive Shein brand has been accused of doing terrible things to achieve its success. Previous investigations into Shein and their supply chain have found that workers in their factories were working up to 18-hour days and were given only 1 day off a month, which blatantly violates China's labor laws. Shein has been accused of stealing designs, selling clothes with high levels of toxic chemicals, and even mishandling their customers' information. But this time, it's different. It's not just an accusation anymore. It's backed up by solid scientific evidence.
This is a dangerous piece of clothing.
Shein, the biggest clothing retailer in America, is built off the back of slaves. And the great part? It's that the average US consumer will hear how horrible this is. Maybe they'll share it on their story on Instagram, and a week later, they'll be right back to ordering their next haul from Shein. What's crazy is that imprisoning people and forcing them to work in labor camps is far from the only shady thing that's been happening in China recently. The country has been known to use their citizens to make money in a myriad of other ways. One of those ways is forced organ harvesting. Yes, you heard correctly. Forced organ harvesting, where China forcibly harvests the organs of prisoners to sell to desperate foreigners in need of an organ transplant. But the story of what happens in China's forced organ harvesting program gets way darker than anything we can share in a public video without getting demonetized. So instead, we've released it as a full-length documentary, available only for members of this channel. All you have to do to access this exclusive documentary, and every private video that's just too disturbing for the public, is click that join button below. And there's a refund policy too, unlike most YouTube memberships. So if you join and you don't think it's worth it, email us within your first month of joining for the first time, and we will personally refund you for your first month. After your first month, there is no refund. So scroll down and click that join button right now.